think it's a huge mistake for the focus to be too clinical or too technical, because in reality, at the end of the day, we're dealing with people and people make decisions, and we have to have the customer service mindset and also the psychology, mindset and knowledge to understand what makes consumers make the decisions that they make, and how can we influence people's understanding and help guide them toward the things that are best for them ultimately.
This is Growth in Dentistry, a dental intelligence podcast, where we ask the question, what does growth in dentistry mean to you? I'm Steve Jensen, a dated dental nerd and your host.
Welcome everyone to another episode of the Growth in Dentistry podcast. I am super excited for today's guest, as I always am, but today's unique. Today's a really fun story, and I'm a sucker for a good story. Now, before I jump in and introduce our guest, a quick shout out to the marketing team at Dental Intelligence. They have been sponsoring this podcast for years, and there's a lot of work that goes in on the back end to produce this week after week for our listeners. So as a way to hook up the audience, they are doing a really cool promo where if you'll take a demo of Dental Intelligence, they'll give you a $50 gift card just for doing the demo. And if it's been a while since you've checked out Dental Intelligence, there's some really cool new things that have come out. They've got scorecards where you can analyze everything that's going on in the business. Basically, any number you want to see, you can look at it, whether that's clinical workflows or front operations in the front of the business. They have some really cool new things on like the forms and consent side of things. So they're starting to automate our consents that are going out, as well as post-op instructions. That's the newer thing is hey, after we finish an appointment, can I automatically send out a message to patients? So that's super cool too, code-based type messaging that's coming out here soon. So it's been a while, definitely come and check it out. There's some really cool new features that they've been working on. Okay, without any further ado, I want to introduce our guest today. I have with me Dr. Sarah Blair. So welcome, Sarah.
Great to be here.
I'll probably refer to you as a combination of either Sarah or Dr. Blair, either one. I'll probably jump back and forth. Now, here's what's super cool. Dr. Blair graduated from Marquette University and followed, I think, a pretty, I don't know if you want to call it traditional. It seems like pretty traditional. Worked as an associate for how many years?
About 2.5.
Okay, and I'll let her tell her story more here in a second, but I want to give you guys a taste of who she is. And then she decided, hey, it's time for me to jump into the ownership bucket of dental practices, and she bought a small practice. Now, just something I want to say, there are a lot of dentists that will buy small practices from retiring docs, and it seems like it could be a great strategy. It's also very risky. I was telling Dr. Blair, I've had a lot of conversations with dentists who have bought these really small practices, and the belief is, hey, the only thing holding this practice back is the fact that the owner doc doesn't want to work more days today. And they've got lots of patients and records, so we're just going to flip this thing around fast. And you'd be surprised at how many people go and buy those and they end up 6 months down, 12 months down, 18 months down the road, and they're like, I can't hardly pay myself. And it's maybe a little more painful than they thought it was to get the business going. So she bought a practice and was able to triple the revenues within 5 years and really grow it into a healthy business. Obviously, Dr. Blair has a love of the clinical side, but clearly showed some excellence on the business side, and has now transitioned into helping doctors with their own businesses. And so, Dr. Blair, welcome to the podcast. I want you to go ahead and give some color commentary. I just gave kind of the quick overview, but tell us a little bit more about kind of your story and why you got into dentistry and how you transitioned into coaching.
Yeah, so in some ways my path was very traditional, but in some ways it was different. I was a little different than most of my classmates because I was about 8 years out of undergrad when I started dental school. I had already had a career of sorts in the service industry. I traveled a lot. I had done a lot of other different things. I actually originally wanted to go to veterinary school, so I pursued that path for a while, switched course. So I ended up starting school later in life than a lot of my classmates, which I really think was an advantage ultimately, because I was able to do a year plus of assisting in a dental office in a corporate group. So I actually had some hands-on dental experience before I even started dental school.
Okay, so did you do assisting while you're doing your pre-dental courses and getting
Yes.
ready for the DAT? Okay, that's great.
Yeah, so my undergraduate degree actually set me up pretty well for applying to dental school. So I didn't really have to do a lot. I had to just take
Forward.
in a
Okay.
chemistry lab or something like that.
Okay.
So I was pretty well set up to apply to dental school other than taking the exam. And but I wanted to make sure. I wanted to make
Uh-huh.
100% sure this was the right pathway. So I got a job as a dental assistant, no training. I didn't have I didn't go to school to be a dental assistant. So they just threw me right in. I got 3 weeks of basically on the job training. Like, go. So I was an assistant for a little over a year, and I got to see things at the front office and behind the scenes, the clinical side of things. Um, it was a great learning experience, but I just wanted to make completely certain that dental school was the right path and that this was a huge investment of time and money and that I was going the right direction. So ultimately, I decided, yes, this is the right way to go. Got into dental school and got started that way.
It's so fascinating. Now tell us about what ultimately launched you into practice ownership, because that can be a difficult jump. A lot of students are jumping out of school with a lot of debt, and so it might take them a minute to get to a place financially where they can prove to the bank, okay, I'm able to produce, X dollars every single year. It's a reliable income. So if I get thrown into a dental practice that I own now, I can
Mhm.
make right by the bank on these loans. So talk us through kind of that transition of going from an associate to being an owner.
Yeah. So for me, it was kind of a no-brainer. I went into dental school knowing that I wanted to own a practice.
Mm,
So it wasn't a matter of if I was going to do it, it
right,
was just a matter of how.
right.
I think a lot of people debate, stay an associate or move on to ownership. I was just 100%, I am going to own a dental practice. So it's just a matter of figuring out the path to doing that. And so I think a lot of people like myself start out on a, buy in to a practice kind of route, where you think, oh, well, just, become an associate and eventually it'll work out and they'll, you
Hmm.
know, I'll become an owner at some point. Like, no, it never worked out that way.
Yeah,
I've
no.
heard that story. So I was an associate in two different practices, part-time at each. Great practices, great owners. For various different reasons, it just wasn't the right fit. And so I ended up moving on from both those associate, buy-in, buyout kind of things into just straight up buying out a gentleman who was truly ready to retire. He was ready to go. Everything was set up, and all the documents were prepared, and it was just a matter of finding the right place and stepping into it. So that's how I ended up owning that practice. And back to what you were saying about, yes, it's risky. I think it can be better in many situations to
Yeah.
buy the most high functioning successful practice that you can afford or find,
Yeah.
because it's already proven to be successful. And I think you're right. In a lot of situations, people get into that small, tiny practice and they're like, what's going on? Why isn't it going? Um, and I think a lot of that is people start out too slow and they're very fearful. They don't want to invest in technology, they don't want to invest in marketing. They don't want to invest in training for themselves and their teams. And in a lot of situations, consulting or coaching. And so it's a very slow start for a lot of people. And a couple years in, they're like, what's going on? Why is this not working? So I went into it with the mindset of this is an investment. I know I'm going to be putting a lot of my time and energy and money, frankly, into it
Mhm.
at the very beginning. And I already had to budget for brand new website and branding. We're going to immediately hire a coach or a consultant. We're going to, switch the software up. We're going to do all the intraoral cameras. I
Mhm.
was ready going into that, knowing that it was kind of like a cross between an acquisition and a startup. So I think you
Yeah.
have to have that mentality that it's not going to go on its own. It needs a push.
Mhm.
And so being ready to put that investment in.
Yeah, I like that. That is true. That it is not going to go on its own. I think there was maybe I'm wrong. Just talking with dentists who've been in for a long time, it makes it sound like there was once a day when there was kind of like a you build it and they'll come. It's like, yeah, no, I just went and bought a practice or did a de novo or scratch practice
Mm,
in my hometown and people just started coming and it was, this beautiful thing.
yeah,
But
I don't
there were
know.
some yeah, there are some realities though, like if you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics data around number of dentists, like the supply dentists and the ADA's research, like that is certainly increasing. But when you look at the number of dental practices, that has actually been relatively flat for the last 3, 4, 5 years. And
Mm,
so what's happening? Well, there's this trend. Of course, DSOs want this. DSOs want redundancy with clinicians because they don't want to have a position where they've got one location with one dentist and they lose that clinician, then all of a sudden that business just halts if they can't get a new clinician in there fast. So they like the idea from a risk perspective of having multiple dentists in a location. It creates redundancy, it allows for some like overflow. And anyway, so they like it that way. But even for private practices that are trying to like, you know, figure out how they're going to stay relevant in this market as DSOs try to like position their way more and more into it. There's certainly still a spot for private practices to be in there. But yeah, anyway, the point being, it's a different market today than it was 10, 15 years ago. And maybe the way you need to approach the business needs to look different. So I kind of want to talk, I'm assuming you got into dentistry because you thought it was interesting, like
Yeah.
the actual
Yeah.
dental problems to be solved, or maybe
Yeah.
not.
Oh,
You tell
no,
me.
yes. No, absolutely. I mean, I've come from a science background. Everything I
Uh-huh.
studied in school from high school on was very science focused, but I've also always had an interest in art and, taken a ton of art classes. And I like the combination of those two things. And most of my working life prior to starting dental school was in the service industry. So I really view, the profession as a service. And I think it's a huge mistake for the focus to be too clinical or too technical, because in reality, at the end of the day, we're dealing with people and people make decisions, and we have to have the customer service mindset and also the psychology, mindset and knowledge to understand what makes consumers make the decisions that they make, and how can we influence people's understanding and help guide them toward the things that are best for them ultimately. But without that mindset, it's not just teeth that walk into your office. It is a person, and we have to deal with the entire person.
Mhm. Yeah, no, that's a really good call out. And I love that you come from kind of the service background before jumping into dentistry because when people are buying things, they make an emotional decision and then they go justify it afterward with logic, right? Like I see the Nike commercial and I'm like, ooh, those shoes are really cool and all those people look cool. So I buy the shoes and then I justify it by, well, yeah, like my shoes were getting kind of old. So I needed some new ones. It's going to improve my training or whatever. There's lots of things that people do that way. So let's talk then about kind of this transition now from clinician into like helping other practices out. Talk me through that. So you grew your practice that you bought, to triple the revenues that it was when you bought it, which is awesome. And then what made you start helping other dentists? Like what got you into that? Did you start having people like reach out to you from school, just in your area where you were like, oh wow, like I might be able to help. More people need help with this because dentists are so good at solving and so interested in solving clinical problems. But when it comes to the business, sometimes it can feel like somewhat of a black box, you know?
Yeah, I would say it's a couple different things. So I was really involved in the mentor program at my dental school. So I mentored several students through their entire dental school career and beyond. And that was really exciting and interesting to me. But I also hired several consultants and coaches
Ah,
myself for the
cool.
practice. And, of course, along the way, listened to a million podcasts and read a million leadership books and business books. And I really highly valued what an objective perspective and someone with more industry knowledge can bring to a practice, because practice owners, we get pretty siloed. We're really focused in this little tiny world where we don't see what else is going on or what other options are out there. And it's so great to have that outside perspective, someone that's seen not just one office but dozens or hundreds of offices. And that's what really inspired me. So we hired a couple different coaches for the practice, and realized that there's some good coaching, there's some not so great coaching out there, and it was extremely expensive. I was investing a lot in it. And
Mhm.
my takeaway was, I feel like I've learned so much, and I have taken away these principles from all of this, podcasts and books and very expensive, coaching myself. I can do this for other people in a different way, make it more relatable and make it more doable and affordable for people. So that was the inspiration. My co-founder and I, who comes from an education background, he's super passionate about how adults learn and how we actually grow as people. So we combine forces to help dentists in the areas that we typically don't learn in dental school. So all the things that you need to be a successful business owner, but that we there just isn't time to convey it
Mhm.
to students in dental school. So that was the inspiration behind it.
Let me chime in here. I actually love that. I've been listening to a lot about the company IKEA lately. So
Mm,
Ingvar is the founder. And one of the things I had this quote that's been in my head like the last month that I think relates to what you're saying. So he says, look, when he was building IKEA, the company, he said, here's the exact quote, and then I'll explain what he says after kind of the anecdote. He said, expensive solutions to any problem are usually the result of mediocrity. So I'll say that again. Expensive solutions to any problem are usually the result of mediocrity. So you're kind of talking about coaching. You're like, I spent a lot of money there. And he says, look, think about it like a table. He says anyone can go and source wildly expensive materials and build a very high quality, super expensive table. He said that's actually not a hard problem to solve. And he said what is a very hard problem to solve is to get a really high quality table that's affordable for most people. He said that is a problem we're solving and a very difficult one to solve. So I like the way that you're approaching, like, how do I get, there are a lot of really expensive solutions to people's problems, especially in dentistry from a business perspective. And I like the way you're approaching that. Like, how can we get this information and help? Because there are so many, we'll talk about this. I think I'll leave this a little towards the end. There are so many good ideas that people have, but maybe struggle with implementation, and that sometimes requires some handholding and coaching. But let's start with this. Let's start with, okay, so now you've been working with practices solving business problems. I'd love to hear from you. What are some of the common, if you think about it like a tooth, like you jump in and you see like cavities where it's like, oh, yep, like in between the teeth, it's a common place for cavities because people aren't flossing. Like, what are some of the common places of decay you see in the businesses that a lot of dentists miss because their business hygiene, so to speak, isn't great.
right. Yeah. I would say it's kind of like in dentistry when somebody doesn't realize that there's a problem until pain is evident or until a
Yeah.
piece of tooth literally falls off. So it's kind of that pain point that cues people in that there is a problem.
Yeah.
And I think those, the decay or the periodontal disease things that, would translate over to a dental practice that you're talking about would be a lack of clarity. I think, especially with team roles, is a really common thing that we see, and that might just fly under the radar for decades, honestly.
Yeah.
And it could just be, Donna at the front desk has always done it this way and it's always worked and it's been great. And then I think the pain point, the toothache, so to speak, is when Donna leaves and suddenly you realize, like, what has Donna been doing? Oh my gosh, we don't have a written job description. We don't have SOPs for all the things that she's been doing at the front office. And maybe Donna wasn't actually as good as we think Donna was, and she was doing these things wrong. So I think that's one of the common pain points or the, issues that
Yep.
cues owners into seeing, wow, I don't really actually know what my team does or should be doing or what I want them doing on a day-to-day basis, every day, every week, and every month. And so, the restoration for that or the solution to that, is really just clarity, creating some clarity, having written job descriptions for every single role in your office and making those not just some document that sits in a file, but it has to be something that is really guiding that team member in what they do every day so that they should have absolute clarity on what your expectation is and what you're going to be holding them accountable for. We just see that there's a lot of, kind of fingers crossed. I hope it's okay up there. I don't even have time to look, especially with the front office. There's often such a separation between the clinical team and the front office team, and owners just don't know what they don't know. And
Yeah.
so it's often when either the team is growing and you need to hire and you're like, what do I even post on this on Indeed, or I don't have a description for this person, I don't have an onboarding checklist. So all those things, it's just a lack of clarity. And so the solution is just get things in writing, communicate it again and again,
Mhm.
and just ensure that there's tons of clarity, and then you can hold your team accountable for doing those things.
Yeah, I love that. I think you're right. I think that's a very common problem. There's a lot of, the more and more I go out to shows and meet with dentists and practice owners and office managers, I realize there's a lot of subjectivity in dental practice roles, meaning like you said, if you ask someone, hey, like what's your title and what do you do? There's a ton of variation practice by practice, which does create like a lack of clarity for the team members. There's also a lack of accountability and or measurement. So meaning like I think a hygienist broadly would say, "Oh yeah, I know I'm expected like they want the owner wants me to reappoint all my patients." But if they were to be asked, like, what is your hygiene reappointment? They would probably tell you, oh, it's 90%. But
Yeah,
then if
sure.
you went and looked at it, it might not be that. Like my wife, for example, I share this story all the time. She's a hygienist. And when I first was looking at joining Dental Intelligence as a company, I wanted to know, like, is this even like legit? Will this help people really? And they plug it in at the dental practice she was working at, and the CEO of Dental Intelligence asks her, "What is your hygiene reappointment?" She's like, "Oh, 90 plus percent." And then he pulls up her previous year and it was 68%. And she was like, "No way. There's
Yeah.
no way it's that low." But
Yeah.
sure enough, he starts pulling up like just the previous week's patient. And she was like, "Oh, well, Bob this and Joe
Mhm.
that." And, she had kind of excuses for every single one. But as soon as she realized, okay, one, I know that's important. But then two, here's how we're going to measure, that piece of my role. All of a sudden, guess what happened to her hygiene reappointment when she could measure it? It just like shot up because she realized, oh, that's important. We're looking at that now to determine my success. And so there's probably an element there with measurement as well, don't you think?
Oh, 100%. I mean, that is also one of my very favorite dental intelligence KPIs is the appointment rate because it's really hard to keep track of it without dental intelligence. It's very difficult. So that is huge to be able to just have that stat right at hand.
Mhm.
So information, it's just a lack of information. So we onboard clients and we're gathering all this information and it's pretty surprising. I guess at this point, not super surprising, but it is unsettling how frequently dental practice owners don't know the basics, the
Yeah.
basic numbers that should be just how many new patients did you have last month? What's your average in new patients
Yeah.
over the past trailing 12 months? It's really shocking how frequently the numbers are a total guess or, all over the place or completely wrong.
Yeah. Or it takes them, an ungodly number of hours to go try to pull a bunch of reports from dentistry, left home and dental that they've probably never pulled a report when you ask them those questions. Where that alone probably speaks. Like if you're sitting there thinking, I don't even know how to like look at some of this stuff beyond the classics. I think most people might have a general pulse on obviously their collections and production, like for sure, because your accountant holds you to that. You've got to know what those are, and then new patients probably like a general pulse, but probably not great on the full picture. Like, hey, how many patients are we losing every single month? That's a huge blind spot for
Yeah,
people.
exactly. And then just to go on from the numbers, I would say financials, the big picture
Yeah.
financials is something that owners really, really aren't aware of. And it's so important. We can produce all day long. Maybe we're not collecting all of that, but let's say
Yeah.
even collecting 97, 96, 97%, not awesome, but okay. And then what is our overhead? Honestly, most owners have no idea. And I think there's a disconnect between owners and their bookkeepers and CPAs that really needs some work. And I love it when owners are getting awesome reports from their CPA slash bookkeeper that are telling them exactly, right on time. They know exactly what they spent last month and what they spent it on and where their, tight areas are that they could work on.
Mm.
But that's, I'd say, maybe 20% of owners that really have a pulse, a finger on the pulse of what's going on there.
Interesting. Now, as you look at businesses, I kind of have like some of the main highlights. For those that don't know, one of the things that Dr. Blair does, and Mark, is they'll go and when they work with the practice, they'll kind of give you like a score, like, hey, how are you doing in kind of these key buckets? And those are things like leadership and culture, the efficiency of your systems, financial systems, team structure, what you're clinically doing and offering, as well as like networking and promotion, like more on like I think the practice growth, new patient side of things. And they'll give you kind of like a score on like how things are going to set that baseline, right?
Yeah.
So talk me through, Dr. Blair, as you go through that process with someone. So a dentist, and maybe they're trying to kind of hack that on their own. A dentist is thinking, okay, I want to grow my business, so they're trying to get like a baseline for how they're doing. I think it's pretty common to get lots of really good ideas, but then ultimately struggle with like implementing something or actually like I have my baseline, I've measured something, like how do I move it to a better place? Can you talk us through like advice you have for dentists who have lots of really great ideas that are trying to
Yeah.
actually implement things? Talk us
Yeah.
through that.
Sure. I would say don't go by feeling. It's really
Okay.
tempting to say, oh, I feel like we're not busy this month, or, I feel like I just end up at the end of the year with no money in the bank account. Those are feelings, or maybe like I just feel like my team is falling apart or our team culture is
Yeah.
bad. I love numbers. I know you
Yeah.
guys have numbers. I think numbers don't lie. And so sometimes it's really hard to get those numbers. And I will say, not every practice management software is really awesome at just telling you what you need to know. And same thing with bookkeepers and CPAs. It's hard to gather all that information. But we have to rely on numbers because numbers don't lie and numbers are going to guide us forward. And so,
Mm,
like you just mentioned on our website, you can take an abbreviated, a little snapshot form of our practice performance assessment. That's that little 20-question quiz that gives you a score. But we have a much more robust, it's called a practice performance assessment. And we have our, 5 essential categories and we score on every single one of them and give an overall, assessment. So we have a number for every single one of those essentials. And I love that because it guides the path forward. You can see, oh, we're at a 5 in all these areas. They're fine. They're doing really good. But we're at a 2 and a 3. And, our team meetings are totally ineffective. The team leader is just talking the entire time and the team is zoned out. So it's looking at those kind of numbers. It pushes us forward on what we need to work on. And then the what you mentioned about having lots of great ideas, we listen to podcasts and read books and like, oh, that's such a good idea, how do I implement it? That's where we come in.
mhm.
Kind of like the behind the scenes accountability partner. So what we really love to do is dial in, what do we need to be working on right now, what's most important? Okay, let's break that down into really tangible steps. What's the next step? What's the first thing we got to do? And then we're going to meet again in 2 weeks. So in 2 weeks, I'm going to be saying to you, how did it go with that document or that conversation or that phone call or whatever it was that you had committed to doing? And then we're just pushing forward on those things so that every single phone call we've moved forward 10 steps, whatever the most important things are. And then it's really amazing how fast things change. It's like 5 steps toward reducing, the cost of your supplies. Suddenly
Yeah.
you're saving tens of thousands of dollars a year. Or, there's so many examples, but it can't just be a vague idea or a feeling. It has to be driven by data and it has to be pushed forward. We can't just think about it or feel about it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a data nerd, so I hear that. I'm like, duh, of course. But it is, sometimes that can feel a little bit, daunting especially if you've never measured something. I've got an econ and finance background, and I read nerdy books like How to Measure Everything, like sometimes you get in some very, subjective areas of the world, and people will say, well, you can't really like measure the how good art is, and it's like maybe not, maybe we can measure an artist's success and impact potentially. Maybe that ruins the game for some, but I'm a big fan of measurement, and so for me I think that lands well. But man, I'm sure there are listeners that are thinking, man, I would love some help in that specific area, and everyone's different. Maybe you have someone who's really great at measurement, but then they over index on that and they struggle with the leadership and team elements of things, because you can certainly take measurement and accountability too far to the point where your team culture isn't great and it feels like micromanagement, and like there's no autonomy. So um that's another balance, I'm sure, that you have to strike.
Yeah.
I would love, oh, go ahead, did you have a thought?
I was just going to add to what you just said. I totally agree. I think it can't just be about data. Data is the foundation and it should guide our decisions, but we have to layer on top of that leadership and communication skills
Yep.
because you cannot do this alone. You literally cannot.
Yeah.
So you have to bring your team with you and you have to have your team on board. And that's, team culture, leadership skills, communication skills. And that's one of our favorite things to coach on is, we've got this data point. How do we get our team, our entire team, bought into, hygiene reappointment rates or whatever it is, how are we going to get that collections percentage from 95 to 99? That's
Yeah.
a team effort and we have to have buy-in and we absolutely cannot do it without strong leadership skills and strong communication skills.
Yeah, I agree. I want to hear from you. I just had like, this is kind of along the same train of thought, but it's kind of like a random thought. I was thinking about how cool it is that you as a dentist have, learned how to build a successful business and are trying to give back to the community, it's really fun to think that while there's this kind of movement of DSO consolidation, there's also this movement of like dentists and skilled operators that are like, hey, private practices, you can be successful as well. There's a lot to learn. And the thought I've never had until for some reason when you were just talking, it just clicked, is you could sell, if you're struggling with the operations side, you could sell to a DSO and let them just like take it. But that comes at a really high cost. Like you're giving up a lot of your business to do that. And I'd never compared like that cost to the cost of like, hey, I want to just join a group of dentists and, work with a consultant like Dr. Blair, where like that cost, relatively speaking, is like far lower to say, hey, I just want to like work with this groundswell of other skilled operators and dentists that want to keep delivering like really great care as a private practice. And anyway, I just think it's very cool what you're doing. Now, let me finish. I've got kind of two questions to end. One is like an advice question. Like if you could go back to your graduating class at Marquette and you're like, hey, here's what I've learned so far. These would be like my top couple of things, advice as you start your career. What advice would you go back and give kind of a graduating class? And then I always finish the podcast with the same question, which is what does growth in dentistry mean to you? So we might kind of like mold those two a little bit. But let's start with what advice would you go back and give, you know, Marquette University graduates as they're stepping out into dentistry?
Yes. So I would say think of this graduation day as just the beginning.
Mm,
So you're going to need to invest in yourself much more than you might ever have thought. And so this is really just the jumping off point. This is when your learning really starts. And now it's a little more difficult because it's up to you. And so you have to guide your own education from this point on. And you may decide to stay in a DSO forever and you just focus on developing your clinical skills forever. Or you may want to branch out into practice ownership and you need to develop your entrepreneurial skills. But no matter what you end up going into, I'd say leadership and communication skills are going to serve you anywhere you go, whether you're in a corporate environment or you're in a small out of network private practice. You need those skills as the foundation because you might be the best clinician on the planet, but if you cannot communicate about it, people
mhm.
aren't going to move forward with the care that you're recommending. So no matter what you go into, that's what I recommend.
Yeah, I like that. And let's finish off with the question that I ask every guest, which is what I said, is what does growth in dentistry mean to you? It's the namesake of our podcast. So I'd love to hear what you have to say, Dr. Blair.
Yeah, I would say growth in dentistry to me means just constantly improving. And I think that people can constantly improve in a lot of different models in dentistry. I think you can constantly improve and iterate the DSO models and the corporate models, and those can be constantly growing and improving. But I think it's really cool that private practice dentistry can constantly grow. And maybe you want to incorporate airway and you want to incorporate sleep medicine, you want to incorporate maybe you want to specialize. There's so many different things that you can do to continually grow and improve. And so I would say I think as long as people continue to be passionate and push for their own development of themselves, I think there will always be growth in dentistry.
Yeah, I love that answer. It echoes a ton with me. I'd say that answer extends even beyond the profession of dentistry. For me in my life, as a reflection, the moments that feel kind of the most exciting and exhilarating are moments in my life when I'm clearly making progress on something towards, a goal, an outcome, something that I want to refine. And that's a really fun part of life. And of course, there's times in life for those listening that are like, don't want to like be totally consumed by, a hustle culture or something. There are for sure times in life where it's good to sit and be appreciative of what we have, of what we've, gained, enjoy some of your successes. But I'm telling you, you're gonna enjoy for a certain amount of time. You're gonna be like, okay, what's next?
Exactly.
Because there's just thrill in the growth and the pursuit of, of something new, of something greater, that's really exciting. I think it helps drive us as humans. So.
I agree. And I think if you have that motivation driving you forward and you've put in the work and the systems are in place, that actually frees you up to enjoy life more. So
Yeah.
putting in the work at the beginning so that the office is flowing smoothly, you're going to be
Uh,
able to go on vacation without stress and you're going to be able to sleep at night without obsessing about, is my team going to show up in the morning if all those things have been accounted for already.
yeah, I like that actually. So then my mental picture is okay, maybe in the early career, I'm figuring out the problems and solving the problems. How can I grow to the point where my business runs really efficiently so that then I'm starting to solve the problem? Okay, how can I go on a 1 week vacation and never look at my phone? And that might be the cool new problem you're trying to solve, but you can't get there until you have like a really solid, business. So the problems you're solving might get more fun, the better you get at
They
some
do.
of this. So.
Cool.
Cool, Dr. Blair. Thank you for joining me on the podcast and for being here. I'm going to throw this in the show notes. If you want to get in touch with Dr. Blair, their website's awesome. It's Indie practices with an S.com, indiepractices.com. I'll throw that in the show notes. Is there any other way that they could reach out to you?
Yeah, any questions or anything I can ever support you in, just reach out anytime. It's Sarah at indiepractices.com.
Perfect. And then, I'll just give an invitation to folks. It's rare to find someone like Dr. Blair who both has that like clinical background along with this excellent business mindset. And not just business, but also like if you go, you probably heard it from her, like just her personality, she's very grounded and focused on not just numbers but also the leadership and culture element of the business, so it's rare to find someone like that. So I would definitely encourage you to go and interact with her, jump on the website, take that little quiz that she mentioned, that 20 question quiz, the scorecard, and then maybe have a further conversation with these guys around how to improve your practice. So once again, this has been another episode of the Growth in Dentistry podcast. Thanks again, Dr. Blair, for joining, and we will talk soon. See you guys.